Hello, everybody. This is Tony Felker again, President and CEO of the Frisco Chamber of Commerce, and welcome back to Conversations with the Chamber, where we're trying to work with our local business community as we work through this COVID-19 crisis, and especially as we poise our business community to get ready to recover once we're through with this. So as a reminder, this is covering topics that are of interest to our community as they're making decisions about how to get through this crisis, move past it, and once again get into recovery. Joining me today, we have Mr. Chris Lee, our Governmental Affairs Manager with the Frisco Chamber of Commerce. We also have with us Mr. Steve Wentz with Cushman, Wakefield. And we also have with us via audio Byron Prescott with the law firm of Scheef Stone. And what we're looking at today is talking a little bit about real estate. We know that as companies are going through this crisis, cash flow is a huge issue. And the two biggest items, I would say, in cash flow are people and real estate, and how people are trying to adjust to that as they make these decisions. We've had talk yesterday about SBA loans. That should be out there on our library, which will continue to build. We'll have additional conversations in the future about other cash flow considerations. But a lot of people are wondering what to do about that big issue out there with real estate, lease payments, mortgage payments, and how to negotiate through that. Before we get to our real estate experts, Chris, do you have any thoughts on anything that's coming up in regards to this aspect of people's business and anything out there with the stimulus bill, things like that, as it relates to real estate?
Yeah, so I've been following pretty closely for the last few days, obviously the different phases of the stimulus packages that are coming out. Just a quick recap of phase one, that stimulus package was about $8 billion, and that went towards medical testing for the coronavirus and a lot of medical equipment. So all those dollars have already been dispersed and are being used right now for the different coronavirus testing and respiratory equipment that hospitals will need. Phase two was the paid family and sick leave programs, and we've got some more information on that on our website with our blog as well. So if you want to follow some of the more detailed information about what happened with phase two, that's also on our blog. And then phase three is in the works right now, following it last night into today. Hopefully the House will pass it up in DC. The Senate passed it yesterday or the day before, I believe. It's all been a little bit of a blur, but they're working pretty quickly on it. And so hopefully we'll have something by the end of the day that we'll take to the president's desk, but we'll kind of see how that works out here in the next 24 hours or so. So hopefully we'll get some good individual stimulus package money with some of that, as well as there was talks of $375 billion more dollars going into small businesses and different loan opportunities that way. So there's a lot of opportunity coming up with phase three of the stimulus package. So I'm following that really closely, and we'll have details of all of that as it comes out officially from DC on our blog on friscochamber.com.
And once again, as a baseline, when we say today, since we're recording this, today is Friday the 27th, and we hope the House will approve the bill that was formally approved in the Senate. They're trying to decide if they can do that via a voice vote, I guess, rather than everybody having to go to Washington to approve it. So hopefully that'll get approved today. So let's shift a little bit here to the topic at hand, real estate and lease negotiations, et cetera. As I reached out to Steve and Byron, they both indicated they are extremely busy right now, as several people in this area. So there's no doubt this is a big topic going on. Steve, let's just first start with you. Tell us a little bit about what at least what used to be your day-to-day operations and kind of what you're doing these days in terms of what's all going on.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. So at Cushman and Wakefield, my primary job is to represent office tenants. And it can be something as simple as site selection. It gets down into from holding their hand through an RFP process, request for proposal, letter of intent, financial analysis, construction management, move coordination, all of those skill sets that really help a business owner focus on their business. And we kind of hold their hand through the real estate piece. And at that point, we get it up to the line where we need to bring in an expert like Byron to work on the lease negotiation. The lease will be reflective of the letter of intent, but we'll need someone of Byron's expertise and as a real estate attorney to best negotiate the lease and protect the tenant as best as he can.
Very good. Byron, let's go ahead and fact check Steve. How well did he do in terms of what your day-to-day business has been up until now?
Steve did great. And thank you, Steve. It's people like Steve who kind of bring the parties together. And as lawyers, real estate lawyers, we're very grateful for the work that they do. We wouldn't have work if the brokers weren't bringing these people together. So thank you, Steve. I'm basically a 30-year veteran of lease negotiations. I represent both landlords and tenants, so I see both sides of the picture. The first thing that came to my mind when all of this happened was most of these leases have a force majeure or act of God clause in them that somehow explain that there would be not an ending to the duties, but an abatement of the duties of the parties in the event that some catastrophic event occurred, which is what we're experiencing now. Occasionally, those exclude viruses. It's very rare to see that exclusion, but sometimes I would say tell people to check their leases for the force majeure or act of God clause. And I'm reading them like crazy right now because people are sending me those pages. What I'm telling people to do if they're on the tenant side, and Steve, I bet you probably are too, is look to your insurance policies to see if there's a business interruption clause or if there is some business interruption coverage, and understand what that is. If you have that, I suggest going ahead and making a claim, even if you think the insurance company or your agent has told you that they're not going to honor the claim. Go ahead and make the claim, let it get denied. And there are lots of lawyers and other people who walk people through these claim procedures when the insurance company denies those claims. The one thing that I would say that I'm telling people the most to do, and it's the most neighborly thing to do, is to reach out, especially if you're a tenant, reach out to your landlord and say, look, I can't make these rent payments. What I would propose is that we abate the rent for the period that the government has forced me to shut down. And we can tack on that time to the end of the lease where presumably you, landlord, can get a higher rate of rent in the future for those months that were freezing time. I'll stop here and ask anybody if they have any questions, because I think, I've probably said a mouthful, but does anybody have any questions?
Well, it's interesting that you brought up force majeure, because every time I'm looking over an event contract or a lease or anything like that, I always look at that and going, okay, we're never going to use that clause. It's never going to apply. And what do you know, here we are in unprecedented times where it just might apply. So that's interesting. And I think something that is something as a reminder for all of us going forward. So there's that. The business interruption clause is very interesting as well. Steve, what are your thoughts on all that?
I concur with Byron. We're working a lot with tenants that have been directly impacted. Specifically, if you're in the hospitality industry, if you're in the airline industry, if you're in the retail industry, and you're in the restaurant industry, those four segments are all directly impacted by this. And to Byron's suggestion, on behalf of our clients, we are making calls to the landlord to negotiate the deferment of rent. And I think one thing people need to keep in mind is, even when the tenant says, hey, I can't pay my rent, it doesn't mean the landlord doesn't still have a mortgage payment. So when you go to them and say, help us out, it's not free money. The landlord still has an obligation. And depending on how collateralized and leveraged that their real estate is, what if it's, cross-collateralized with other pieces of property around the country? There might even be lender constraints where the landlord even has to go to the lender. So it is a chain reaction. It's not so much as just going to the landlord and saying, hey, cut us a break, and the landlord going, absolutely, we'll just throw it on the back of the lease. It's not that easy. The experience I've been having, by and large, has been very positive. I've only had one experience that has turned antagonistic. The rest have been very positive, and they're being dealt with on a case-by-case basis. I've called a number of leasing agents around town, and their perspective is simply, everybody's situation is different. So instead of the leasing agents being proactive and just reaching out to their tenants, they're kind of sitting back and waiting for the tenant to make the call if the tenant is feeling pain. So this is something from the tenant perspective. If we can show the pain, we have to be able to show it. There are people trying to take advantage of this that aren't really feeling the pain from their revenue cycle. But if we really can't show it, we've had some very productive talks with landlords.
So that's a great point,
town.
Steve. So from a couple of businesses that I've talked to, they almost seem, what's the word? They almost seem hesitant to reach out to the landlord and afraid of what the, I don't know, repercussions or effects might be. But you were, in fact, and I want to get Byron's opinion as well, you were, in fact, saying if you're a landlord or a leasing rep, you're almost expecting tenants to be reaching out. Are you not? In that fact that tenants should be reaching out to be proactive and being able to show that pain, if you will.
I would tell you, Tony, that the tenants I've talked to try to put them at ease, as I've taken on the responsibility of reaching out to the landlord on their behalf, I have told every one of them, I promise you this, you are not the only call coming to this landlord.
Right.
So yes, that is how we're addressing it. Byron?
All right.
Well, from the landlord's perspective, and again, my practice is about 50-50, and I think it's important, Steve, that you mentioned the restaurant industry. I've got 2 restaurant chains that I represent, as well as a multi-location sporting goods sales group. And from the landlord's perspective, I've told people they're not going to call you and ask if they can give you a break. I can assure you. They're receiving calls, they're taking calls, they want to work with people to the extent that they can. And in Texas, at least, there was an order by Greg Abbott that said no evictions. Well, we can't go lock doors because he didn't specify whether it was commercial or residential or both. And so I've told my landlords, hey, don't go change the locks. If you see people moving out, you can't, you don't have any rights right now based on what the government is saying. So back to what you're saying, to my tenants, don't expect the landlord to come offering breaks and perks and abatements. You have to go to them, and communication is the key right now. And to the extent, and this is probably advice my colleagues would slap me for, but to the extent that you can leave the lawyers out on the front end and just make a friendly call directly to the landlord, that's what you should do.
And just to put it into very simple terms, this is a win-win situation, if you will, given the circumstances, because if the tenants are truly being impacted this and they have the pain and they have virtually no cash flow, to negotiate something with the landlord, to tack it on at the end, to prorate it out over the balance of the lease, to, hey, as you said, put on a higher rent for 3 or 4 months at the end of it rather than now, that's good for the landlord because it keeps the tenant in place, it keeps the lease in place, keeps that cash flow coming down the line, as opposed to a business going under, and now you've got an empty space that they may or may not be able to fill. Is that the bottom line, the easiest way to look at why this is a win-win?
That is absolutely the truth. You don't want a dark spot in your retail center if you can avoid it. You don't want empty space in your office building or your industrial building. Going forward, there's going to be a point where these landlords have to work with their tenants. It's absolutely important to work with the tenants. And I don't think we're talking about a long period of time here. I mean, we are talking about a month or 2 of abatements, right, which can be added to the end.
And that's a key part of what we're trying to do, is to educate our businesses how to position themselves in such a way that when the restrictions are lifted, when we are through this crisis, it is safe to go back to work. It is safe for the public. We want business to come back as quickly and as strongly as possible, and how to position yourselves for that. From a timing perspective, and knowing that this could involve the mortgage holder, the lender, and things like that, what sort of timing is required for this? If you've got a tenant and a landlord, leasing agent, the parties involved that are in agreement, we say, we're going to abate 3 months worth. We're going to tack it on at the end at XYZ rate. Is that something they can get done in a matter of a few days and then be able to move forward? Does that require approval from the lender? What's the timing involved in the process on that, just as to how people can work through that process?
Me, I would say, I don't know if any individual particular loans, for example, require a communication with the lender or approval from the lender. Those are one-off deals, and I think Steve was saying every circumstance is different. I think that's what he was referring to. But I would say as quickly as possible, get an amendment drawn up to the lease, basically a page and a half, that explains when the lease was formed, who's involved in the lease, and then what period of time the rent will be abated and what the new expiration date for the lease would be and at what rate. It's not a difficult process, and I suspect I'll be doing hundreds of them in the next couple of months.
Steve, you in the same boat?
Oh, Steve, yes, I agree with Byron. And that is, Byron, what I meant by every deal is different. It all depends on the ownership structure. I've had responses come back on that day of, we understand your specific business. We understand that your revenue line has vanquished. Just know, don't even think about paying April rent. I've had them happen that quick on one call, to things that are taking a few days. And to Byron's point, these attorneys are overloaded right now. And when he's saying he's going to be drafting hundreds of amendments, that's going to take some time. And I don't doubt the number. It's going to be a lot. This particular pandemic we're going through, we can all talk about the 4 segments we discussed, which was hospitality, airline, restaurant, and retail, but it goes much deeper than that. It goes to general business operators who, I've got a client that's a service as a software business or software as a service SaaS business. And his vendors are telling him right now, hey, just a heads up, we're not going to pay you next month. Yep. Well, this is a general business operator. He can't point to any of those 4 industries I just mentioned. Yet now we're going to have to engage with his landlord and try to work out some sort of deferment.
Now, Chris, it can get a little bit complicated because on the SBA loans that we talked about in another segment, there are some considerations that if you use proceeds of one of those loans for payroll, rent, debt service, that can factor into a loan possibly being forgiven. So if people have questions about, do I pay the rent, do I not pay the rent, do you have any recommendations on that, or how do people make those decisions?
Yeah, so I would absolutely look at the SBA loan process for anybody who's going through one of those. For example, the software as a service business, it's an opportunity for them to apply for that SBA loan. It goes up to $2 million, and the application is fairly simple. That I will warn anyone who's going through that process right now, they are very overloaded. So there's just go into it with a lot of patience, but
keep it refreshed on that website, right?
Yeah. But that's definitely an opportunity for them to have some of that cash flow to pay rent if that's where the deal that they strike with their landlord and say, hey, give me some time. Let me see if I can get this SBA loan process. I'll get you a check as soon as we can get something done. It's an opportunity for a lot of businesses, small businesses here in the area that they can apply for. And then document all of that, document the hardships, document the suffering, I believe is what we said earlier, the hardship that the business is going through. And when that comes back around, the SBA, Small Business Administration, will actually look at forgiving some of those. And there's a lot more money potentially going into the Small Business Administration disaster loan program with this phase 3 of this package. So hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll actually get some proper verbiage later today or tomorrow regarding the forgiveness portion of the SBA loans and what would potentially be forgiven and all of that. And part of that is paying payroll, paying rent, some of that kind of stuff.
Okay. Steve and Byron, as we come around to wrapping this up here today, so I wanted to know, I talked to a couple of businesses and they said, hey, I've reached out to my landlord. I haven't heard anything back. I'm going to guess and assume and ask for you guys to verify. That doesn't mean the landlord is not willing to work with them. Chances are, like everybody else, they're overwhelmed right now. They're getting a lot of phone calls. So can you comment on that? And also, if a small, medium-sized business who's not an expert in real estate, if they have questions, who do they talk to? Is that their landlord, their leasing agent? Where do they go to for more advice on this sort of stuff? Steve?
Sure. The first question on the landlord not getting back to them, meaning that they're just busy and they're overloaded right now. I don't know that that's necessarily the case. I think Byron and I have both had instances with specific landlords that just frankly are a little bit more callous than others. To give them the benefit of the doubt, I would say most it's because of overload, but I wouldn't say that that's the case with every single one of them. I think some of them are just trying to sit back with this. You know, most companies have now gone through or about to go through their first payroll check since this has happened. And, you know, they're kind of sitting there going, hey, are we at least going to get that April check before we start trying to figure this out? Because maybe that's one more month we don't have to defer if we can sit tight for the next few days. So I could see that being in play. On the side of who they should reach out to, you know, those of us in my field, and we have a number of just fantastic commercial real estate brokers in this market that really are invested in their clients. I would say that we're a good resource because we can also share with the client, tenant, or even just somebody that's not an existing client, but just is needing the help. We can kind of share with them what we're seeing and use maybe some of the leverage we have from what we've garnered on the deals we've restructured to help them along that way. And I would say that call could go to Byron as well. You know, their expertise on the legal side is much more than ours. Ours is really more on the business negotiation, but from the legal side, we don't even attempt to do what Byron does.
Byron?
Well, and I appreciate that because there are a lot of people who think they can lawyer their way through documents, and that includes a lot of brokers. And I'm getting a lot of frustrated clients calling saying, I'm getting advice from all different directions and I really don't know what to do. When it comes to their duties under the lease, it is critical that they call their lawyer. Of course, brokers have experience and can do some interpretation, but when it comes to interpreting provisions of any particular lease, I would say call your lawyer. And a lot of us are available. You know, we're not on our morning or afternoon commutes anymore, so some of us have up to 2 hours extra in our day. And so I'm here. Everybody knows my cell number, all my clients do, and we're just kind of working through it. As far as the first question goes, I would suggest keeping on trying. You know, try by phone to reach your landlord, try by email, email the management company. Make sure that you have the documentation out there that you tried, and they'll likely call you back. And at that point, and again, I would put this after a claim against your business interruption insurance. I think those claims need to get in right away. But reach out, communicate, calmly work your way through the process, call your lawyer and ask them to help you decide what a good way to be. But I'm telling my clients right now, see if you can get a 3-month abatement in rent, or it would be 3 months abatement or the date you reopen for business, and promise the landlord you're okay with tacking those days onto the end of the lease term.
Very good. Well, guys, so when I hear the takeaways, and you just kind of hit on some of them, Byron, check that force majeure clause to see if there's an abatement of duties. Check your insurance policy for business interruption clause. Make certain to be able to document and show the pain to your landlord, and just start the process and reach out to either your broker or especially your real estate attorney and going from there. So we appreciate you guys taking your time. Steve Wentz, Cushman and Wakefield, Byron Prescott, Scheef Stone. Any closing thoughts from any of you guys? We'll start off with you, Chris.
No, I'm just excited to see what hopefully comes out of DC today. so we can actually get some information out about what's coming next. I think there's a lot of anxiety because a lot of us don't know what's next. We don't know when this is going to be over. And I'm hoping that we can get some of those answers to our community here as quickly as possible. And then just again, a reminder, we're here as a resource to our business community. If there's questions, if there's more topics that you want us to cover in these types of interviews, please shoot us an email, info@friscochamber.com. We want to really be that resource for you here. So I appreciate both you, Byron, and Steve getting on today and chatting with us. I think it's been pretty informative for me. So I appreciate that and definitely appreciate your time.
And Byron, your closing thoughts?
I would say keep calm, wash your hands a lot, and remember to do some self-care through this process. A lot of people are mentally taxed right now, and it's important to take some breaks, drink some cold water, walk around, do some exercise, and just make sure that you're taking care of yourself and your family.
Advice above and beyond real estate. No extra charge there either. Mr. Steve.
Yeah, Byron, thanks for that advice. I totally agree. As I now am struggling with the cabin fever of working from the house, I would say, and we've had a lot of calls, you know, we're an international real estate advisory firm. We've had talks with our chief economist, and I really think, you know, we need to heed the warnings of the stay in shelter. But we also don't need to panic. We know we're going to get through this. We've always gotten through these types of issues in the past historically. And be prepared for a recovery that should be a pretty big bounce up when it finally does turn again, just because of the momentum that we were experiencing and achieving prior to this virus. So we know it's going to pass. We just don't know when.
Very great words there. And to everybody out there, we're going to add this recording to the library as we're slowly building a good-sized library on different topics. They'll be out there. As anybody views these, please be sure to share them. Let people know. Look for the resources that are out there on friscochamber.com. Sign up for our blog where you'll get more information. Chris is there just anxious for more stuff to come out of DC so he can get in there and dissect it and analyze it and come up with the latest. But we are there for our business community. And as I said, the main thing is we want everybody to be educated on these topics. When they make the decisions that have to be made, those tough decisions, they've got as much information as possible to get them through the crisis. And then how do we position this community? Whereas Steve said, when we come through this, and we will, we're going to come through this as strong as possible and be able to recover just as quickly as we can and get everybody back up to, quote, normal business. So, gentlemen, we thank all of you, and for everybody else, let us know what you want to hear about. We're looking to do these as much as you need. We're going to add more topics out there and bring you guys back. So everybody, stay strong, be safe out there. Thank you all very much.